I knew my time at Synapse Corporation had reached its absolute expiration date the moment Vice President Vivian Cross called my entire AI logistics unit, a luxury we simply could not afford during a transition quarter. Not even 5 minutes into our Monday morning all-hands meeting, and I already felt as though I was sitting in a sunlit conference room watching my own corporate obituary being drafted in real time, minus the basic courtesy of flowers or a modest fruit basket. Vivienne was beaming in via high-definition video link from the San Mateo satellite office. She possessed that permanent, polished smirk plastered across her face, the unmistakable look of an executive who genuinely believed that arrogance qualified as visionary leadership. Her sharp blonde bob was far too immaculate for someone responsible for complex software engineering, and her voice carried that smooth, HR-approved, syrup tone taught in high-priced executive boot camps. It was a calculated cocktail of artificial empathy laced with a razor-thin undercurrent of intimidation. She clicked smoothly to a slide ominously titled Alignment Directives for Future-Facing Architecture. Without taking a breath, she announced that effective the following Monday, our entire division would transition to mandatory full-time on-site collaboration. No preliminary survey, no departmental discussion, just a flat declaration that presence was now equivalent to culture. Around the room, veteran engineers froze in place. I blinked slowly, reflecting on the fact that for 3 consecutive quarters, my predictive routing engine pilot had outperformed our best regional logistics metrics by over 34%. I had accomplished nearly all of that high-level, algorithmic architecture from my basement study while wearing fleece pants and worn-out slippers. But in Vivian's newly minted domain, measurable performance mattered far less than physical submission and visible compliance. Then came the real maneuver. Vivienne paused for dramatic effect, leaning closer to her camera. She declared that all active research prototypes, early-stage concepts, and foundational algorithms must be immediately logged into the shared internal corporate repository. Full source code repositories, technical notebooks, mathematical models, and version timestamps were to be uploaded by 5 in the afternoon. Her office, she added with an airy wave of her hand, would be reviewing all origin documentation for patent consolidation and corporate intellectual property filing effective immediately. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and felt my jaw muscles tighten. That mandate had nothing to do with cross-functional synergy. It was outright corporate theft. A quiet, paper trail cleansed heist designed to strip senior engineers of their lifelong innovations before the upcoming tech summit. If that sounds overly cynical, you have clearly never watched an outside executive slide into a senior vice presidency with a flawed employment contract, an ambitious slide deck, and a memory stick hungry for credit. Before I proceed with what happened next, I should offer a quick word. I realize many of you listen to these workplace sagas while tackling mountain loads of dinner dishes, driving through evening traffic, or scrolling through your phones during a lunch break. If you appreciate these stories of quiet corporate chess, take a quick moment to press that like button and subscribe to the channel. It truly keeps our lights burning and our legal defense funds fully loaded. Now back to Vivian. I unmuted my microphone with deliberate composure. Can you clarify, Vice President Cross, whether this consolidation mandate applies to foundational architectures developed entirely outside of corporate hours, utilizing non-company hardware and independent resources? Vivienne offered a sharp, predatory smile that barely reached her eyes. Alan, if you are engineering solutions that align with the broad strategic roadmap of Synapse Corporation, our legal team operates under the foundational assumption that such work falls within our corporate purview. I pressed further, keeping my tone perfectly measured. Even if 0 company equipment, 0 corporate hours, and 0 internal team assets were ever utilized in its creation. She actually let out a light, mocking laugh. God help me, she actually chuckled right into her broadcast microphone. Alan, if you find yourself uncomfortable with our updated operational policies, you are entirely welcome to resign and move on. The digital conference line plunged into total, suffocating silence. Even my junior developer, Toby Miller, who notoriously typed with 2 fingers while chewing on his pen cap, stopped mid-keystroke. As for me, I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl an insult. I simply smiled into the webcam. "Thank you for the exit strategy," I said softly. I closed my laptop lid with a satisfying quiet click. I unplugged my secondary monitor, stood up, and took a long, steady breath that smelled faintly of stale coffee creamer and impending liberation. I packed my personal items into a sturdy cardboard box, my ceramic mug shaped like a penguin, 2 physical notebooks filled with personal mathematical sketches, and a small carved wooden desk plaque my mentee had gifted me 3 years ago that read Master of Workarounds. I left the corporate-issued monitor. I left the mouse. I even left the mechanical keyboard I had bought with my own funds, because the company-issued peripheral clattered like a tap-dancing insect. Let Vivian keep the plastic hardware. She would need far more than keyboards for the legal firestorm she was casually walking into. I walked out of that glass-walled facility with the measured stride of a man heading out for a relaxing Sunday brunch. No dramatic scene, no slamming of mahogany doors, just a steady walk toward the elevator lobby. My junior mentee, Chloe Bennett, hurried out into the hallway behind me, her face pale with shock. "Alan, what is happening? Where are you going? You cannot just walk out." I looked at Chloe with absolute calm. "Stay, Chloe. Keep your head down, do your job, and simply observe." I did not shed a single tear. I did not slam the heavy glass exit doors, though part of me wanted to leave a stress fracture in the drywall for facilities to ponder. Instead, I walked out into the warm afternoon air, popped the trunk of my sedan, and laid my personal box neatly next to a heavy, pre-addressed yellow envelope. The envelope was stamped, certified, and sealed with tamper-evident tape. It was addressed to the General Counsel of Synapse Corporation. Inside lay a formal declaration, not a plea for renegotiation, but an absolute evidentiary paper trail proving that the AI-driven predictive logistics core they planned to showcase at the upcoming Midwest Tech Frontier Summit was entirely my private property. They assumed I would break under pressure. They assumed 48-year-old engineers simply cowered when threatened with policy changes and quietly surrendered their life's work to save their stock options. But I do not bruise easily. I build quietly, and when a corporate predator attempts to seize what I have meticulously constructed, I do not engage in petty office shouting matches. I file. The journey from the corporate parking lot to my next destination took less than 15 minutes, but mentally it felt like crossing a vast legal divide. I did not drive toward my home. Instead, I navigated straight toward Oakway Commons, a modest commercial office park nestled between an independent dental clinic and a small retail storefront. It was far from glamorous, but it housed 2 critical assets I required immediately: absolute privacy and an experienced public notary named Frank Jenkins. Frank was a retired military administrator in his early 60s who possessed zero tolerance for corporate drama and an absolute reverence for pristine paperwork. He greeted me with a firm nod as I set my binder onto his wooden counter. "Looks like we are finalizing the heavy artillery today, Alan," Frank remarked, putting on his reading glasses. "Let us make every single page legally bulletproof." "Frank," I replied. For the next 20 minutes, we proceeded through a rigorous verification process. 3 formal signature confirmations, 2 biometric identity checks, and the physical logging of an encrypted flash drive containing raw mathematical repository trees. Frank impressed his heavy steel notary seal onto 3 distinct provisional patent application filings, his stamp leaving deep, crisp indentations in the heavy parchment paper. The documents we finalized were 3 provisional patent applications under federal patent law, specifically Title 35 of the United States Code. The first covered my adaptive real-time predictive routing matrix. The second detailed an asynchronous multi-node load balancing protocol. The third was an invisible fault-tolerant architecture. I had designated the Vance protocol, a deep back-end execution engine capable of dynamically rerouting processing loads during sudden network anomalies. These 3 algorithmic frameworks represented the absolute foundation of what Synapse Corporation was attempting to package as Project Apex. But every single mathematical line had been forged entirely independent of their corporate ecosystem. The origin of that software did not lie in a corporate cubicle or a company-sponsored hackathon. It had begun 11 months prior on a grease-stained paper napkin inside a 24-hour diner in Kent, Ohio. I remember sitting in a vinyl booth at 2 in the morning, nursing my fourth cup of black coffee while an elderly waitress named Sarah refilled my cup without asking. I was 47 years old at the time, exhausted by corporate paralysis, watching senior executives repeatedly table my proposals for intelligent supply chain optimization because the concepts were considered too complex for sales representatives to easily pitch. So, I made a conscious decision that cold November evening. I would build it myself, not for Synapse but for the broader industry, and under my own absolute ownership. Over the next 11 months, I established an ironclad operational protocol to separate my independent work from my employer's infrastructure. I purchased a dedicated laptop using my personal credit card, ensuring the transaction receipt was archived. I installed a clean Linux operating system and never once connected the device to Synapse networks, virtual private networks, or company hardware. Every single code repository commit was cryptographically signed, time-stamped, and pushed to a private server registered under an alias I had utilized during my graduate studies. Furthermore, every 4 weeks, I met with my longtime friend Dr. Lyle Prescott, an adjunct professor of computer science at a local state university. Lyle was an expert in distributed systems with zero ties to Synapse Corporation. We would sit in his study while he systematically reviewed my code progress, technical logs, and system architecture diagrams. Lyle signed and dated my engineering journal pages as an independent third-party witness, establishing a continuous, unbreakable chain of proof under federal patent standards. 6 months into development, when the core routing algorithms began demonstrating efficiency improvements, exceeding 40% over traditional logistics models, I retained specialized legal counsel. I did not hire a corporate lawyer from a flashy downtown firm. I retained attorney Jacqueline Miller, a formidable intellectual property practitioner who had spent 25 years dismantling invalid corporate patent claims for mid-tier defense contractors. Jacqueline had reviewed my operational logs with painstaking scrutiny. She examined my home utility bills, internet service provider traffic logs, hardware procurement receipts, and Lyle's notarized witness affidavits. Alon, she had said, leaning across her conference table during our initial consultation, your separation of assets is pristine. Under United States patent statutes, specifically Title 35, Section 102, these inventions belong exclusively to you. Synapse has zero contractual, equitable, or statutory claim to this intellectual property. Together we had drafted 3 comprehensive provisional patent filings. We held them in readiness, waiting to see whether Synapse would respect intellectual property boundaries or attempt an illegal expropriation. Vivienne Cross had provided the answer during that fateful Monday morning meeting. In her desperate rush to consolidate authority and fabricate a breakthrough product for the upcoming Midwest Tech Frontier Summit, she had unwittingly walked straight into a legal snare of her own making. As I stepped out of Frank's office into the afternoon sunlight, my personal mobile phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was a text message from Chloe Bennett. Vivienne just walked past your empty desk, the text read. She asked Toby why your repository folder is empty. Toby told her you took your hardware. She looks furious. I did not reply. I got into my car, drove to a quiet park overlooking the river, and watched the water flow past the stone bridge. The corporate chess pieces were fully arrayed across the board. Vivienne believed she held absolute power because she possessed an executive title and a vice presidential mandate. She was about to learn that, in the world of federal patent law, titles mean nothing when compared to timestamp proof. Back inside the corporate tower of Synapse Corporation, an atmosphere of unadulterated chaos was rapidly consuming the 14th floor. Over the next 7 days, what should have been a triumphant march toward the Midwest Tech Frontier Summit descended into a frantic, sleepless nightmare for the engineering department. Vivienne Cross had staked her entire executive reputation and a massive portion of her contractual performance bonus on the public unveiling of Project Apex. She had already booked an expansive gold-tier display booth at the convention center, commissioned high-end marketing banners, and scheduled live television interviews with regional tech journalists. The company had issued press releases boasting that Project Apex would deliver a revolutionary, automated 35% reduction in enterprise shipping overhead. There was only one catastrophic problem. The actual software code inside their internal repository did not work. When Vivian had ordered her team to compile the master demo build 4 days before the summit, the entire architecture collapsed within seconds of initialization. Unhandled memory exceptions flooded the terminal screens, execution threads stalled, and dynamic routing maps displayed flatline error codes. Vivian had immediately summoned Toby Miller and 3 senior software contractors into her corner office, slamming her palm onto her glass desk. "What do you mean the dynamic load balancer is missing?" she demanded, her voice straining against her carefully cultivated corporate exterior. "Alan Vance spent 3 months working on that module. Where is the source code?" Toby swallowed hard, adjusting his glasses. "Vice President Cross, the code snippets Alan left in the shared repository were just basic stub functions, structural templates with empty execution blocks. The actual logic algorithms, the mathematical equations that drive the predictive routing, were never committed to the corporate network. Then pull his local machine backups." Vivian snapped. "Recover his temporary files from the local network cache." "We tried," Toby admitted quietly, looking down at the carpet. "Alan never plugged his development devices into the local network. He ran all his simulations on an isolated, non-approved sandbox framework. Furthermore, when I audited the Git origin timestamps on the legacy modules we do have, the underlying math predates the establishment of Project Apex by nearly 4 months." Vivian's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "That is impossible. He was an employee of Synapse Corporation. Anything he thought of while sitting in this building belongs to us by right of employment. Rewrite the logic. Have the contractors recreate the routing math from scratch. We have 72 hours. The contractors exchanged terrified, exhausted glances. To reverse engineer a complex mathematical engine involving multidimensional predictive calculus in 72 hours was not merely difficult. It was an absolute technical impossibility. They attempted to patch the missing execution paths using crude, hard-coded rules and brute force heuristics. But trying to replace my elegant Vance protocol with hasty conditional statements was like attempting to repair a high-performance jet engine using duct tape and plastic zip ties. Every time they attempted to run synthetic load stress tests, the crude patches buckled under pressure. Memory leaks multiplied, execution times skyrocketed from milliseconds to minutes, and the system consistently crashed whenever simulated traffic exceeded 500 concurrent nodes. Meanwhile, internal panic began leaking through the corporate ranks. Junior developers whispered in break rooms about how Vivian had ousted the senior architect responsible for the core engine. A mid-level project manager secretly forwarded a thread of frantic internal emails to Chloe Bennett, asking if anyone possessed Alan's personal contact information to request consulting assistance. Chloe, remembering my final instruction to observe, simply replied that I had cut off all communication upon my departure. In her growing desperation, Vivian refused to alter the summit timeline. Her overwhelming hubris dictated that image mattered far more than functional reality. She convinced herself that the live summit demo could be carefully staged, that her team could mask the underlying system crashes using pre-recorded video loops and hard-coded data displays. "We are not postponing," Vivian declared during a tense midnight conference call with corporate marketing. "Synapse Corporation does not step back from a major public product launch. We will present Project Apex as planned, secure the partner commitments, and let the engineering team resolve the back-end anomalies post-summit." She truly believed she could fake her way through a major technology demonstration in front of 300 industry experts, institutional investors, and seasoned trade analysts. She believed that corporate buzzwords like cloud-native synergy and autonomous logistics alignment could obscure the glaring absence of a functional software engine. She was entirely oblivious to the fact that while her team was busy staging fake interface slides, attorney Jacqueline Miller was preparing to serve a legal instrument that would transform her carefully orchestrated product launch into a public catastrophe. The Midwest Tech Frontier Summit opened on a crisp Thursday morning inside the expansive convention center in downtown Indianapolis. The main exhibition hall was packed with over 2,000 industry professionals, venture capitalists, and tech journalists. Bright overhead spotlights reflected off pristine display glass, while the steady hum of corporate networking filled the air. Synapse Corporation occupied booth 207, a massive, high-profile installation situated directly along the central boulevard. Giant hanging banners displayed the sleek Project Apex logo, accompanied by bold taglines. The future of autonomous logistics has arrived. At 9:30 in the morning, 2 hours before Vivian Cross was scheduled to deliver her keynote presentation. On the main stage, a tall woman in a sharp charcoal business suit walked calmly into the Synapse exhibition area. It was attorney Jacqueline Miller. Jacqueline carried a slim leather briefcase. She approached the registration counter, where Karen, Synapse's senior general counsel, was reviewing the final presentation schedule alongside Vivienne. "Are you Vice President Vivian Cross and General Counsel Karen Vance?" Jacqueline asked, in a clear, resonant voice that carried over the surrounding noise. Karen frowned, stepping forward. "I am General Counsel. Who are you?" Jacqueline unzipped her briefcase and extracted a thick, formally bound legal folder. "I am Attorney Jacqueline Miller, representing Mr. Alan Vance. I am serving you with a formal cease and desist directive and an official notice of patent interference pursuant to Title 35 of the United States Code, Sections 102 and 271. Vivian let out an exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes. "Is this about Alan's childish exit?" "Listen to me, counsel. Provisional filings are meaningless placeholders. They confer zero enforceable rights until fully issued. You are wasting our time." Jacqueline did not flinch. She opened the folder, revealing official documentation stamped with federal registration seals. "Vice President Cross, these are 3 provisional patent applications formally accepted and logged by the United States Patent and Trademark Office 5 weeks ago, under the exclusive ownership of Mr. Alan Vance. Furthermore, this folder contains certified documentation proving that Mr. Vance developed these architectures entirely outside corporate scope, utilizing non-company equipment, personal funds, and validated by independent notarized witness affidavits." Jacqueline leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to an icy, precise tone. Section 271 of Title 35 establishes that active inducement of infringement and commercial exploitation of proprietary patent-pending subject matter constitutes willful infringement. Should you proceed to market, demonstrate, or publicly claim ownership of Mr. Vance's patented algorithms today, my client will immediately file for treble damages and personal executive liability. Karen's face drained of all color. As a seasoned attorney, she understood instantly what Vivian's hubris had obscured. Willful infringement under federal patent law carried devastating financial penalties, including triple damages and mandatory coverage of opposing legal fees. "Vivienne," Karen whispered urgently, grabbing Vivian's arm. "We need to pause the presentation right now. We need to review these filings with outside patent counsel immediately." Vivienne snatched her arm back, her eyes flashing with furious denial. "We are 10 minutes away from the live broadcast. The investors are seated. I am not canceling this keynote for a frivolous scare tactic from a bitter ex-employee." Ignoring her legal counsel's explicit warning, Vivian marched up the steps onto the main presentation stage. Spotlights illuminated her as she took her place at the podium. Behind her, a massive LED wall displayed the Project Apex dashboard. Over 300 audience members filled the auditorium, while thousands more tuned in via the summit's official live web stream. "Welcome, leaders of innovation," Vivian began, her voice projected through the auditorium sound system. "Today, Synapse Corporation unveils the ultimate frontier in artificial intelligence logistics, Project Apex." She clicked her remote controller, initiating the live demonstration script. On the giant display wall, a dynamic map of North American freight corridors loaded smoothly. Simulated delivery fleets began calculating optimal delivery routes. For 30 seconds, the pre-staged visual interface appeared to function. Then, the crude back-end patches collapsed. A stark red dialog box suddenly flashed across the 60-foot screen. "Critical system exception." Vance protocol kernel uneachable. Null pointer exception in core routing loop. The dynamic shipping routes dissolved into a chaotic maze of erratic red lines. System processing speed plummeted to 0. The simulation froze completely, displaying a glaring debug error message in bold white text across the main screen. Module access restricted. Proprietary architecture registered to Alan Vance. Loud gasps echoed through the auditorium. Audience members leaned forward, pointing at the massive screen. Tech journalists immediately pulled out their tablets, snapping photographs of the public system collapse. In the third row, two major venture capital partners exchanged grim glances, closed their notebooks, and walked out of the hall. On stage, Vivienne stood frozen under the blinding stage lights. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She clicked the remote controller frantically, but the screen remained deadlocked in its hard failure state. Her face turned ghost white as she stared into the crowd of stunned industry executives. The live stream chat exploded with comments. The carefully constructed facade of Project Apex had not merely cracked. It had disintegrated live in front of the entire technology sector, and standing in the back of the auditorium, watching quietly from the shadow of the exit doors, was Alan Vance. The emergency disciplinary sessions of the Synapse Corporation Board of Directors convened at 8 o'clock the following morning, inside the executive conference suite, on the top floor of the corporate headquarters. The atmosphere inside the room was suffocatingly tense. Seated around the solid mahogany table were 6 board members, the chief executive officer, chief risk officer, and general counsel Karen. Vivienne Cross sat at the far end of the table, isolated and stripped of her usual executive composure. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at her unread corporate emails. The chief executive officer initiated the meeting without customary pleasantries. He turned directly to Karen. General Counsel Vance, brief the board on our exposure. Karen opened a heavy binder. Our exposure is severe and absolute. Yesterday afternoon, Attorney Jacqueline Miller delivered a complete evidentiary package to our legal department. It includes notarized code logs, ISP device traffic records, personal procurement invoices, and third-party witness affidavits from Dr. Lyle Prescott. Every single foundational algorithm inside Project Apex was created by Alan Vance, outside company time and without company resources. Karen paused, looking around the table. Furthermore, Attorney Miller provided an audio recording from our Monday all-hands meeting. On that recording, Vice President Cross explicitly told Mr. Vance, and I quote, "If you don't like our new policies, you can just resign and go." Under governing labor laws and contract principles, that statement, combined with his clean resignation, established an absolute severance of employment prior to any corporate claim on his provisional filings. The lead board member, a stern man in his 60s, turned his gaze toward Vivienne. "Vice President Cross, did you audit the origin of this intellectual property before claiming it for our summit launch?" Vivienne attempted to defend herself, her voice cracking. I operated under the standard corporate assumption that all engineering concepts developed by active staff belong to Synapse. We were under intense quarterly deadline pressure. You ignored explicit warnings from legal counsel. The CEO interrupted harshly. You attempted to force a proprietary asset from an employee without contractual consideration, and you dragged this corporation into a catastrophic public failure that wiped out $40 million in market capitalization overnight. The CEO stood up, reading from a prepared resolution paper. Effective immediately, by unanimous vote of the Board of Directors, Vice President Vivienne Cross is terminated for cause, forfeiting all severance packages, stock options, and executive indemnification rights. Furthermore, Project Apex is formally canceled, and Synapse Corporation will publish a complete retraction and apology to Mr. Alan Vance. Vivienne sat paralyzed as security personnel entered the room to escort her from the premises. Her corporate access badge was revoked on the spot, her decade of executive ambition ending in complete, silent humiliation. 3 weeks later, the morning sun streamed through the expansive glass windows of my new office on the 9th floor of Viron Technologies, a premier, highly respected software research firm specializing in next-generation logistics. I sat behind a sleek walnut desk, enjoying a hot cup of black coffee from my favorite penguin mug. On the wall behind me hung my newly framed appointment certificate, Chief Patent Officer and Principal AI Architect. Viren Technologies had approached me 2 days after the summit disaster. They did not offer me a standard employment agreement. They negotiated a formal licensing deal for the Vance protocol, granting me substantial equity, complete architectural autonomy, and a dedicated team of brilliant young engineers. My door opened, and Chloe Bennett walked in carrying a stack of system architecture reports. She had resigned from Synapse shortly after Vivian's termination and joined my new department as a senior systems analyst. "Morning, Chief Vance," Chloe said, with a warm smile, placing the files on my desk. "The legal team just confirmed that our secondary international patent applications under the Patent Cooperation Treaty have been officially logged. Excellent work." "Chloe," I replied, reviewing the documentation. "By the way," Chloe added, leaning against the doorframe, "did you see the trade news this morning? Synapse tried to launch a stripped-down alternative called Route IQ. The moment they ran the compilation, their backend crashed because your residual licensing blocks locked their servers. Their lead contractor quit on the spot." I set my coffee mug down and looked out over the city skyline. I felt no lingering anger, no need for vengeance. The law, combined with meticulous preparation and quiet discipline, had executed a perfect operational resolution. They believed they could take what was built through sacrifice and vision, simply because they held executive titles and corporate authority. They forgot that real innovation does not belong to slides or buzzwords. It belongs to the minds that forge it in the quiet hours. I picked up my pen, signed the international filing documents, and smiled. It was time to build.